Chapter 4, Part 3. The inhumanity of the oppressors and revolutionary humanism both make use of science. But science and technology at the service of the former are used to reduce the oppressed to the status of things. At the service of the latter, they are used to promote humanization. The oppressed must become subjects of the latter process, however, lest they continue to be seen as mere objects of scientific interest. Scientific revolutionary humanism cannot, in the name of revolution, treat the oppressed as objects to be analyzed and, based on that analysis, presented with prescriptions for behavior. To do this would be to fall into one of the myths of the oppressor ideology, the absolutizing of ignorance. This myth implies the existence of someone who decrees the ignorance of someone else. The one who is doing the decreeing defines himself in the class to which he belongs as those who know or were born to know. He thereby defines others as alien entities. The words of his own class come to the true words, which he imposes or attempts to impose on the others, the oppressed, whose words have been stolen from them. Those who steal the words of others develop a deep doubt in the abilities of the others and consider them incompetent. Each time they say their word without hearing the word of those whom they have forbidden to speak, they grow more accustomed to power and acquire a taste for guiding, ordering, and commanding. They can no longer live without having someone to give orders to. Under these circumstances, dialogue is impossible. Scientific and humanist revolutionary leaders, on the other hand, cannot believe in the myth of the ignorance of the people. They do not have the right to doubt for a single moment that it is only a myth. They cannot believe that they, and only they, know anything, for this means to doubt the people. Although they may legitimately recognize themselves as having, due to the revolutionary consciousness, a level of revolutionary knowledge different from the level of empirical knowledge held by the people, they cannot impose themselves and their knowledge on the people. They cannot sloganize the people, but must enter into dialogue with them, so that the people's empirical knowledge of reality, nourished by the leaders' critical knowledge, gradually becomes transformed into knowledge of the causes of reality. It would be naive to expect oppressor elites to denounce the myth which absolutizes the ignorance of the people. It would be a contradiction in terms if revolutionary leaders were not to do so, and more contradictory still were they to act in accordance with that myth. The task of revolutionary leaders is to pose as problems not only this myth, but all the other myths used by the oppressor elites to oppress. If instead revolutionary leaders persist in imitating the oppressor's methods of domination, the people may respond in either of two ways. In certain historical circumstances, they may become domesticated by the new contents which the leaders deposit in them. In other circumstances, they may become frightened by a word which threatens the oppressor housed within them. In neither event do they become revolutionary. In the first case, the revolution is an illusion. In the second case, an impossibility. Some well-intentioned but misguided persons suppose that since the dialogical process is prolonged, which incidentally is not true, they ought to carry out the revolution without communication, by means of communiques, and that once the revolution is won, they will then develop a thoroughgoing educational effort. They further justify this procedure by saying that it is not possible to carry out education, liberating education, before taking power. It is worth analyzing some fundamental points of the above assertions. These men and women, or most of them, believe in the necessity for dialogue with the people, but do not believe this dialogue is feasible prior to taking power. When they deny the possibility that the leaders can behave in a critically educational fashion before taking power, they deny the revolution's educational quality as cultural action preparing to become cultural revolution. On the other hand, they confuse cultural action with the new education to be inaugurated once power is taken. I have already affirmed that it would indeed be naive to expect the oppressor elites to carry out a liberating education. But because the revolution undeniably has an educational nature, in the sense that unless it liberates it is not revolution, the taking of power is only one moment, no matter how decisive, in the revolutionary process. As process, the before of the revolution is located within the oppressor society and is apparent only to the revolutionary consciousness. The revolution is born as a social entity within the oppressor society, to the extent that it is a cultural action. It cannot fail to correspond to the potentialities of the social entity in which it originated. Every entity develops or is transformed within itself through the interplay of its contradictions. External conditioners, while necessary, are effective only if they coincide with those potentialities. The newness of the revolution is generated within the old, oppressive society. The taking of power constitutes only a decisive moment of the continuing revolutionary process. In a dynamic rather than a static view of revolution, there is no absolute before or after, with the taking of power as the dividing line. Originating in objective conditions, revolution seeks to supersede the situation of oppression by inaugurating a society of women and men in the process of continuing liberation. The educational dialogical quality of revolution, which makes it a cultural revolution as well, must be present in all its stages. This educational quality is one of the most effective instruments for keeping the revolution from becoming institutionalized and stratified in a counter-revolutionary bureaucracy. For counter-revolution is carried out by revolutionaries who become reactionary. Were it not possible to dialogue with the people before power is taken, because they have no experience with dialogue, neither would it be possible for the people to come to power, for they are equally inexperienced in the use of power. The revolutionary process is dynamic, and it is in this continuing dynamics, in the praxis of the people with the revolutionary leaders, that the people and the leaders will learn both dialogue and the use of power. This is as obvious as affirming that a person learns to swim in the water, not in a library. Dialogue with the people is neither a concession nor a gift, much less a tactic to be used for domination. Dialogue, as the encounter among men to name the world, is a fundamental precondition for their true humanization. In the words of Gaho Petrovic, a free action can only be one by which a man changes his world and himself. A positive condition of freedom is the knowledge of the limits of necessity, the awareness of human creative possibilities. The struggle for a free society is not a struggle for a free society unless through it an ever greater degree of individual freedom is created. If this view be true, the revolutionary process is eminently educational in character. Thus the road to revolution involves openness to the people, not imperviousness to them. It involves communion with the people, not mistrust. And as Lenin pointed out, the more a revolution requires theory, the more its leaders must be with the people in order to stand against the power of oppression. Based on these general propositions, let us undertake a more lengthy analysis of the theories of anti-dialogical and dialogical action. Conquest. The first characteristic of anti-dialogical action is the necessity for conquest. The anti-dialogical individual, in his relations with others, aims at conquering them, increasingly and by every means, from the toughest to the most refined, from the most repressive to the most solicitous. Paternalism. Every act of conquest implies a conqueror and someone or something which is conquered. The conqueror imposes his objectives on the vanquished and makes of them his possession. End of chapter 4, part 3.